Okay. Guess we could start off. Yeah, the question is, why do you think it's important to have confidentiality, and what do you think about some of the exceptions?
Yeah. Um, well, I think the importance of it is, I mean, it feels quite obvious, but like to try to state it is the the primary thing I'd say is the feeling of safety for the client. Knowing that their information's not going to be shared is going to help them get deeper into the process and um, of course, that's the only way that healing's going to help happen is if they feel that sense of safety and protection. Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like building that trusting container.
Mhm.
Because I know people like personally who are like really not against having a therapist, but kind of like really apprehensive of it because being a therapist, you are part of like a system. And I think it's hard for people to trust that like you're not going to like give their personal information away. Um, and I guess it also depends on like the population. When I was like doing the reading and just thinking about this question in general, I thought about um like people of color who have gotten 5150 and how that has turned like it could turn like fatal for some people.
Mhm.
Um so I imagine like the exceptions that you would bring is in as a clinician on that first session saying like, well, if you're harmful to yourself or others, I do have like this is part of my, I guess, policy to report it. But yeah, that was something that I grappled with where I was like, well, I don't want to get police involved. So like how would I work around that, I guess?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, or really, how do you really reserve that for like only the most critical types of situations? And
Mhm.
how do you, and I guess also cultivating over time, like your own sense of trust in your ability to like read the severity of the situation?
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's like, for instance, there's suicidal ideation that's really about fantasy and just needing
Mhm.
the person needing to work through a fantasy of, or them just needing to work through something cognitively. And then there's, you know, actual planning and things
Yeah,
like mm,
definitely.
um, I liked the example from the reading about I think it was a school counselor scenario where the child was telling the counselor about their mother stealing clothing and food and then we were asked to what would you do in this situation, and I mean that was you know like very clear, like there's no threat to life here.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I like just really thinking about it as a last measure for only like most dire situations.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
feel the same way because yeah, I'm sure there are clinicians who have abused like this type of like scenario, but for me, yeah, unless it's like absolutely necessary, because I was thinking a lot about that scenario too, because I think I told you I'm gonna do practicum through OUSD, so I'm gonna be working with kids. And I think a lot about how, yeah, there's so many different layers. Like I'll be working with teachers, parents, and then the kids, and it's just like really trying to center what is best for the child, but also like I want them to know that they also are able to have confidentiality. Like it's part of their, the agency of them being in like a relationship with me. Um,
Mhm.
and like, yeah, and I don't know, when I was like a kid and in therapy, I very much was like a little bit scared of my therapist because I was worried they were going to tell like my parents about something I said, so I was very like particular in how I said things.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just like how do I like make sure like really enforce that I'm here as like a trusting person for someone.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially considering like if the child is from an abusive or violent home, that child's gonna A, probably fear all adults, and then B, not gonna want to report stuff because it could end up that they receive more punishment as a result if their parents find out. So yeah, I mean, these are such delicate situations. I really admire that you're planning to
Yeah.
relation.
Yeah, it's definitely, yeah, the exceptions are like child and elder abuse, so it's kind of like what do you really do in those scenarios? And I think a lot about like if I were to report something with the child I'm working with, they might get put in like sent to CPS, and then that's not necessarily a good situation most of the time now. And it's just, yeah, it's very delicate in that regard. But
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, cool. Well, well, it asks us to also think about some of the exceptions. I was
Mhm.
wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, yeah, like we're saying, it's almost last case scenario. Like, what was it? The tears off, like, what is that one called? The like the law that basically if someone like your client says like I want to kill this person, you have to like tell that person that they're in danger. I
Uh-huh.
was like that one obvious is like an obvious one too where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to tell that person um what's going on. But yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be exceptions, and it is like the whole I was like reading through some of the other responses to this and people saying like, well, confidentiality, but there's always going to be something that you need to report on.
Yeah. Yeah, I something that I was wondering about it as I was doing the reading was like this idea that if you do need to break confidentiality, to actually um there's some emphasis in the reading about including the client in that process of breaking confidentiality, like disclosing to them that you have to do it, and then also even potentially soliciting their participation in that, like they're giving their consent to it.
Mhm.
Um, and that was just interesting to me. I mean, it's I'm trying to think about like being in a situation where someone's, threatening to hurt someone else, and then meanwhile they're also consenting to
Mhm.
the process of telling this other person. That's so hard for me to imagine. Um,
Yeah, I was also wondering that because I do think about like the first sessions I've had with therapists where you do sign like a consent form because they say like I am like mandated to do this if like you're harmful to yourself or others. And I always sign it, but then it's like if you're actually in the situation with a client where they're saying it, do you stop it and you're like, well, now I have to go and report you? Like how does the actual process look like?
yeah,
Um, Especially if they're threatening, and I think it's also what if they're threatening to you as well?
yeah, yeah. This is where a supervisor comes in very handy
Yeah.
to, yeah, help walk you through these scenarios if they should arise.
Yeah, definitely.
I while I was doing the reading, I was reminded that I had a psychiatrist a couple of years ago who we were doing telehealth because it was sort of still in the pandemic,
Mhm.
and and it was through my insurance. So, you know, I guess, you sign the documents, um confidentiality documents in the beginning, but I don't really read these documents.
Me neither.
Yeah, and so I was really surprised, and this was kind of careless on his part. But
Mhm.
one day, like he would often screen share, like he would say, because we were on Zoom, and so he'd say, "Let me show you something, Delia," and then he'd say, "I'm going to screen share," and then he'd share his screen, and like one time, his notes about me were on the screen with his diagnoses.
Whoa.
Yeah, and um like he hadn't told me about like that he made multiple diagnoses. And so,
Oh.
like I was being seen to be evaluated for ADHD
Mhm.
and a little bit help with managing the antidepressants I was on at the time.
Mhm.
But then like I saw on his screen like that these like substance this is like major disclosure right now, but and this was also during the pandemic. I was not very well.
Yeah.
And I saw like these kind of substance abuse diagnoses, and I was like, oh, oh, you think I'm addicted to cannabis? And he was like, oh, don't worry about that. I just have to send diagnoses to the insurance, to continue covering your treatment. Just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it at all. And I was kind of like, well, now I've seen it and I can't
Yeah.
unsee it. So like that's fine, but like it would be so much cooler if you discussed with me
Yeah.
you were depicting me this way in your mind
Yeah.
and
That's
to the
wild.
insurance. I know, and he was like really cool in general, so I was like really surprised. So that makes me feel like, like yeah, I really appreciated in the reading the emphasis on sharing the diagnoses with the clients. Cuz
Yeah, being transparent.
yeah, cuz like seeing it that way accidentally was like not
Yeah.
it was not cool.
Yeah, that makes it seem like you're a spectacle or something. And it's kind of just like oh, I'm just gonna write stuff down. I think the fact that he played it off and didn't like apologize for like the breach of trust and everything is kind of, yeah, just wild to me. But
Yeah, because then it created all this also shame in me like,
yeah,
well, why did he just talk to me about this? Why didn't he tell me like that? This is what he was thinking about me.
yeah,
And then it's saying like, oh, it's not, these aren't really anything. These are just to send to the thing. It's like, well, are they or aren't they? Because you wrote down like a diagnosis and like
yeah.
just trying to like be flippant about it now isn't that.
Yeah, I think that's like honestly a great example of the, yeah, just being transparent.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I think, yeah, I'm so sorry you went through that. Just like me trying to figure out if, like how it would be if my own psychiatrist did that, I would, yeah. Did you end up like changing to a different person after that?
No, but I continued with him, but I was just luckily I also happened to get on a plant medicine path around the same time.
Yeah,
As I moved into this plant medicine path, I just stopped needing any of the pharmaceutical stuff.
yeah,
And and so I continued seeing him, but I also was able to like titrate off my antidepressants. And I basically was like, yeah, I don't like your ADHD medicine, thank you. And he was like,
yeah,
what? And I'm like,
yeah.
and I'm like, no, my brain works the way it works for a reason. It's not broken. It's just I'm not supposed to have like a certain kind of job that requires a certain kind of neurotype.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and so he was like, okay. And then over time, he like, you know, would say to me, Delia, you really do seem happy. You really seem well. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm not joking to you about these plant medicines.
Yeah, like you found your own acceptance,
Yeah,
so
and eventually he like graduated me. He was like, "I
oh,
don't think you need me anymore, Delia." And I was like, Yeah, I'm like, you should tell some more people about plant medicine.
Yeah,
You should try it
seriously.
yourself. Anyway, that's how it kind of worked out for me, but
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing where it's like he was yeah, it's like a weird breach of confidentiality on like his part in a way because like I don't know, like I know when I have clients I'm going to have notes about them. But I would unless it's like a diagnosis especially for a psychiatrist, they should tell you what they're thinking. But yeah, wow.
Yeah,
Man.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Well, I mean, this isn't like super relevant, I guess, to like the topic of our assignment, but that whole experience with him and then with me basically graduating from like not even needing any of the medicines that he was prescribing was like um a interesting because like now I'm going into this field that comes out of a specific like comes out of this certain paradigm.
Mhm.
Thankfully I'm at CIIS and I'm in a program that embraces like, you know, the integral
Mhm.
uh, approach and isn't like doesn't insist on things being like a specific way that's created by the medical model.
Yeah,
But it's like really interesting because I'm going into this field that I also have like a lot of mm, sense of what's problematic in how the traditionally things are done in this field.
definitely. Mhm.
Yeah. And so yeah, it's just interesting to be like moving at the beginning of a trajectory into a field where I'm like also already breaking, you know, away from what is um traditionally clinically kind of the norm of the field.
Yeah, I think that's a good way. I honestly do think that's relevant because it's a very much like Western medicine kind of view of things. It's very clinical. It's very like by the book and rule based and everything versus like also thinking about how other cultures work. Like, I guess that's a big aspect to this conversation too, is like cultural humility and how like it's important to see like some cultures are going to be more confidential than others because it's like, yeah, a shame or a guilt on like how
Mm.
they view their own mental health or how their mental health is viewed in their culture. Um, and I think a lot about that being in CIS because it's like, I think when I tell friends or people I meet, like, oh, I'm in school to be a therapist, they're like, they're like, what does that mean? Like, are you going to be like diagnosing people and stuff? And I was like, well, I'm going to be an art therapist. So it's like totally outside of like the norm of how most people view therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think, I don't know. Yeah, I guess we are veering off, but yeah, that did like make me think a lot about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. Well, thanks for going with me and taking me with you to these different places in and around the topics of the week. Are there any other things that you're thinking about around privacy and confidentiality and privilege?
No, I think there's probably gonna be so many questions I have like after we talk and I see other people's videos, but
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like we covered like quite a bit.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks, Karina.
Thank you.